Welcome to the Correct DRS User Tutorial Stabilization. This tutorial is broken up into 3 sections. In Part 1, we took a look at a simple, real-world example of stabilization. In Part 2, I'll go over the various parameters in detail, and in Part 3, we'll cover a more complex example of stabilizing a splice bump. Let's take a look at the same material we used in Part 1 to understand how each of the parameters affects the outcome. In Part 1, I already mentioned that you can change the size of the tracking box and motion search area. You can see when I raise the tracking box size property, the box gets larger. Correct is going to try to match everything that is within the box from frame to frame, so the key is to make the box large enough that the tracked feature is identifiable, but not larger than necessary. As I raise the motion search area parameter, you can see the motion search box gets larger. This gives you a visual cue as to how far away Correct will be looking to match this feature in subsequent frames. It's a good idea to keep this box as small as possible while still accounting for the severity of the judder. Larger tracking areas will result in longer processing time. Now let's take a look at the processing settings. For Part 1, we use Smooth Mode with both first and last frames as anchor points. This is the recommended setting and should be used in most normal circumstances. If you look at the tracking graphs, it will help to understand how each of the parameters affect the outcome. As you can see here, Smooth Both, Correct is trying to find a smooth curve from start to end that will remove any judder while preserving intended camera motion. If I switch to first or last frame as an anchor point, you can see that the curve changes to favor that anchor point. When in smooth mode, the smoothing parameter tells Correct how closely to approximate the existing tracked motion. Lower settings will more closely follow the original motion, including intended camera motion and instability. Higher values will make a stronger correction, trying to lock out any motion. Lower settings will keep the fixed curve closer to the tracked data, which means that the results will look more like the original. Higher values will make a stronger correction. In some cases, you will want to select Remove All. This mode will lock the picture in to be perfectly still and steady, and should only be used in still shots with no camera motion. Finally, you need to tell Correct which kinds of motion you want to fix. Only horizontal, only vertical, both, or both plus rotation. In most cases, you will want to do horizontal and vertical. The other important parameter is Missing Data Fill, which has 4 options. We need to fill in missing data because as we align the frames to each other, it will lose pixels around the edge. For example, if I have to adjust the frame to the left, the far left pixels will be out of frame, but the current frame doesn't have the corresponding pixels that belong on the right side. The recommended setting is Previous Frame, which will take data from the previous frame to fill in the missing pixels. You also have the option to fill with white or black pixels if you are certain the edges fall outside the delivery area. The last option is Zoom. Instead of filling in missing data, it takes the remaining portion of the frame and zooms it in to fit the original frame resolution.